In all seriousness, as I end here, it's not often that I get the privilege to introduce a fellow friend and colleague. Jeff and I have common roots. We're from Cincinnati, Ohio. We came out of the products of the public school system there. And Jeff began one of his key parts of his career with GE. He ran the healthcare division for many years there before ascending to his current role. And so we were very familiar with Jeff and his great leadership when he ran the healthcare division. But it was that, I have such high regard and respect for Jeff through many reasons. And since GE is also holding its annual shareholders meeting here in Houston, you may not be aware of that, but that's going to take place right here in Houston in April, I believe. Let's show Jeff what a Houston welcome looks like with a warm round of applause as we welcome Mr. Jeff Immelt to the stage. Jeff.
Thank you. Please. Thank you. Please. Thanks very much. Dan and Dan, thank you. I'm so honored to be here in Houston today. It's an important city to GE. In fact, there's probably no city in the U.S. you can go that has as many points of contact in Houston. We've got more than 4,000 employees, many important customers, Continental Airlines, the Houston Medical City, and various customers. So it's great to be here. As I said, 4,000 employees, probably only maybe 200 or 300 in the room today. So welcome to my GE friends. And get back to work, will you? And as Dan said, we're having an annual shareholders meeting. That's one shameless plug for the stock. You have to own stock to get the shareholders meeting. But let me tell you, it is a show. So you should buy the stock, go to the shareholders meeting. Let me tell you, you won't be disappointed. When the retirees get up there, man, there's no telling what happens. So I know this is all about the Houston economic outlook, and I'm not an economist. As Dan said, we don't allow GE leaders to be on for-profit boards, but we encourage everybody to join a not-for-profit board. And I joined the board of the New York Fed in 2003 because I thought I'd learn a lot, and I thought it wouldn't be very hard work. I have to say I learned a lot. The hard work part didn't work out so well for me, given the crisis. But what I thought I'd do is maybe talk a little bit about the broad economy. Talk a little bit about how you run a company in this environment and some of the things I think about, and then maybe talk about a market that's near and dear to you in energy, because I really think that energy is probably one of the economic engines of growth, and you are right in the heart of that as you go forward. And then maybe end with a few thoughts on the country. If you compare this to where we were a year ago, boy, things are a lot better. The credit markets are much improved. I think most of the worst of the losses are behind us. Debt spreads are back probably inside of where they were when Lehman Brothers went bankrupt. And so I think in general, you can't have an economic recovery without having capital markets or credit markets that have healed. So I really think we've made quite a bit of progress over the last year. And I feel like we've built the foundation on which a recovery can take place. That being said, it's even though I would say that when I look at the U.S. economy, things have stabilized broadly. When I mean the manufacturing economy, the housing economy, things like that, have stabilized and are slowly getting better. If you look at sequential orders and things like that, those are getting better. But there's some structural issues that remain. High unemployment, 10% unemployment, lots of excess capacity, record levels of debt, record high deficit. Somehow over the next few years, there's going to be lots of constraints and challenges that most of the developed world, Western Europe, Japan, and the U.S. are going to have to go through. So, a typical recovery, you would see 4, 5, even 6% GDP growth coming out of a recession like the one we've had. The fact that we're talking about a 2% GDP growth in 2010 is quite tepid by the stand of recoveries. Meanwhile, the emerging markets, a lot of places where I go, are quite good. And you can debate whether or not there's bubbles or things like that, but I actually think the fundamentals of having a strong Asian economy, the fundamentals that a lot of the resource-rich places, people like Brazil and the Middle East, are quite good. And so, in many ways, the emerging world has taken the place of the developed world in terms of how this recovery might take place. So I'm quite bullish on the global markets. The government has intersected with the life of a businessman. You know, I joined GE in 1982. Probably from 1982 to 2001, if you were a businessman working at GE and you were in Washington, D.C., you were lost. You know, there was nothing really going on that really impacted your life in Washington, D.C. during that 20-year time period. Now we have healthcare reform, financial reform, energy reform, tax reform, military spending reform, 5 or 6 reforms all going on more or less at the same time in Washington. There's probably another 3 or 4 reforms going on in Brussels, more reforms going on in Tokyo. I mean, we are going to live in a generation. This is not going to go away necessarily fast. We're more volatility and more intersection with governments, and I think that's going to be a backdrop of the economy as we go forward. There's some big problems that have to be solved. They're going to really impact business. Healthcare, you know, Dan and I are both in the healthcare business. I don't think anybody that's around the industry or who's an employer thinks that the current system is sustainable. So we know that things are going to have to change. The question is how and in what terms. And I think in some ways the U.S. has to demonstrate that it can be a solutions-oriented country again in order for us to be a great country again. So there's some big problems, whether it's clean energy or affordable health care, education, how well we're doing on high school education and things like that. There's some big challenges. And the last thing I would say that impacts the people in this room is just the reputation of business, right? There was a Gallup poll that was done about a month or 2 ago that asked the American people, who do you trust? The military's on top with 80% approval. Big corporations and Congress are in the high teens. You know, so we're in some bad company, first of all, and I would say we got our work cut out for us when you look at the future. So all those things I think impact the people in this room and certainly impact GE. You know, when I think about the company and the macro level in terms of what are the big things we have to be getting right in this generation, I would say, and a lot of these, no matter what kind of business you're in, I think are pretty much the same. We've got to be a global company. You know, in other words, a lot of the growth that's going to impact the businesses here in Houston or other businesses are going to take place in other places. So we have to make sure that we are a great global company. We have increased our R&D spending, our research and development spending in 2008, in 2009, in 2010. So if you don't have the financial strength to invest more in research and development, to invest more in technology, to invest more in innovation, the world's going to leave you behind. And we have to continue to up that. I think if we look at growing our revenue, growing our top line, it's going to take more products and services to do that in the future than it's taken in the past. So we are dramatically increasing our R&D. We want to be good at making things. You know, in other words, we want to be a company that is good at productivity, at cost, at supply chain. I really think the pendulum is going to swing back towards people that know how to make things and sell them every place in the world, and we want to make sure that we are investing in that. We want to be a good partner. You know, in other words, I think it's really important for big companies to realize that they can't do it all. And so we've got to be known as a great partner and somebody that can work with a startup company or somebody in the supply chain, and we want to be known as that as well. And the last thing I'd say, in a time period with great volatility around our reputations, with a relatively hostile business media, some of whom we own in the form of CNBC. You got to protect your brand. I mean, if you're running a company and you're not willing to go into the alley to fight to protect your brand, to protect your good name, you're in the wrong field. And if you're wimpy about it, or if you're not willing to do it, find another job. You know, and it's this notion of globalization, investment, making things, knowing how to be a good partner, and protecting the brand. That's where I see GE, and I think those are some of the things that we all need to be working on. Now, we're in 110 countries around the world, and every country that I go to basically talks about when you're meeting with the prime minister, or the king, or the vice premier, is talking about 4 things really. It's healthcare, it's energy, it's education, and it's a financial system that promotes growth. Those 4 things are the 4 pillars of a productive economy. And those four things have to be the productive pillars of the U.S. economy if we're going to be as successful as we want to be and as we think we need to be as time goes on. And so what I thought I'd do is talk a little bit about the role of energy in terms of rejuvenating the U.S. and as being an engine of growth as we look forward. If you weren't in the energy business, if you're an investor, if you're an entrepreneur, if you weren't in the energy business today, you'd want to get in it. You'd want to get in it. If you look between now and 2030, there's going to be a 50% increase in the demand for electricity. There's literally another 400 or 500 million people that are going to be driving cars over the next few decades, which says there's going to be upward pressure on oil price as time goes on. There's literally hundreds of millions of new consumers. There is the need for security and volatility that to protect societies as energy becomes more global, and the need to protect it is greater. There's going to have to be technology that reduces pollution. When you look at energy and where we're going in the future, and in some way, we're going to have technologies that reduce global warming and find ways to capture carbon. So with all those going on, economic growth, the need to reduce volatility, the need for capital, the need for pollution reduction, I think all those say that, when you look at Houston and the role it has in the U.S., and the role it has as really maybe one of the world's hubs of energy, you're in a pretty good place. And in some ways, the resurgence or the leadership that's required in energy is important to this country. And I completely believe that the U.S. should stake out turf that says we are going to be the country that leads in the clean energy future. We ought to put a stake in the ground, and we ought to make sure that that really is the purpose, or one of the purposes that we have going forward. And to do that, you really have to do three things. You have to be big investors in technology, you need public policy that works, and you've got to care about job creation around the industry. And those are the three things we ought to be working on right now to make sure that the U.S. has this leadership role when you look at the next few years. Now, GE, we're fortunate that we're in the business. I mean, I've had businesses that have gone through tough economic cycles in the last 18 months, but my energy business has really stood tall as we've gone through this. We are about a $40 billion energy company. We are extremely technically diverse, from gas technology, gas turbines, steam, nuclear, really everything under the sun. That's been part of our philosophy. In 2002, we acquired Enron's wind business out of bankruptcy for $200 million. That business will do more than $6 billion in revenue this year and generate about $1 billion in cash. I've done a lot of bad deals in my day, but that wasn't one of them. That one worked pretty well. We're very global. We make heavy-duty gas turbines in the United States. It's one of our biggest businesses. 90% of them go outside the United States. So we are a big energy exporter. We are an investor. We've got a $300 million portfolio where we invest in small startup companies in the energy space. We've grown in oil and gas and have expanded broadly in our oil and gas operations technically. So we're in the water business, so we are really committed to the industry, and we think it's an important part of the future. We also have made it part of our brand. In 2005, we launched a campaign called Eco-Imagination. And Eco-Imagination really was under the auspices of Green is Green, that if you introduced clean technology, green technology, you could drive profitability at the same time, so we've associated the brand with it. And today, we've really built our presence in Houston in oil and gas, aeroderivatives, energy, our coal gasification technologies here. And I'd be surprised if we weren't a part of the new jobs you talked about, Dan, created in the future. I mean, we like the industry, we're long the industry, we're long Houston, and we're going to invest in the future and to grow this business in the future to compete and win globally as well. So, that's enough of the GE commercial. What I would say is that this is not just about GE and it's not just about Houston. This is about a business that can create jobs in the U.S. if we're doing the right things and we're doing them well. And it begins with technology. It begins by harnessing the venture capital community. It begins by harnessing the universities in a state like Texas. It begins by really harnessing the entrepreneurs and the big companies. But we need a renaissance of energy technology. We're in the healthcare business in GE, we're in the energy business. We've been in both the businesses for about 100 years. I joined GE in 1982. Our healthcare business probably is in the 8th or 9th generation of technology during my 27 years with GE. We still sell some of the same energy products we sold 25 years ago in the energy business. You know, relatively low oil prices for a relatively long period of time has really made it so that we just don't see our best. And there is a big need to drive more technology, more R&D, more thoughtfulness into the future of the energy sector. And there's no reason why Houston and the universities around Houston and the universities in Texas shouldn't be in the lead of where that goes. Now, I, for one, wouldn't pick a fuel. I wouldn't pick wind or solar or batteries or anything. I'd pick them all. I would be more or less fuel agnostic. What I would do is try to create the right conditions in which technology can be invested in and we can go forward into the future. The other thing I would say is that this is both a big company and a small company. In energy, you need scale. So it's going to be small companies working with big companies. It's one of the things that I've said to the administration as they've spent stimulus money in the energy sector. If you launch 1,000 experiments in energy, you're going to waste money 950 times. You know, and so the decision has to be made how you get scale in these activities as you go forward in the future. But the first thing I want to plant on your head is that Houston should be a technology and innovation hub. I think we are in the first inning or second inning about where energy technology will go, and it's going to happen broadly. It's going to go from conservation, things like smart grid, making more fuel-efficient cars, aircraft engines, things like that. That's going to get lots of R&D. Gas and natural gas, both from an exploration standpoint, but also how do you exploit this incredible natural gas resource base we have in this country? There will be more capital that goes against the distribution of natural gas, the exploration, how you get more. I think Exxon just put a little bit of money into it this morning, and you know, that's going to go forward in the future, and exploration as well. There will be one or, you know, I don't know which one will win, but coal, power generation with sequestration, or nuclear power, one of those two technologies, maybe both, will have to have a big role in the future of the United States going forward. This has to be a country that knows how to do something with coal. We haven't built a new nuclear plant for 25 years, but those technologies have to be a big part. Renewables will grow. You know, renewables today are maybe 2% of the power generated in the United States, and by that I mean solar and wind and biofuels. If those go in the next decade, between now and 2020, if those go from 2% to, let's say, 8 or 9 or 10% in the U.S., those are tens of billions of dollars of opportunities for entrepreneurs in this room, for the city of Houston. And there's no reason. You've got all the technical base that gets developed around the oil industry can all be applied to solar and any of those other businesses. So that's going to have a big, the grid has to be bigger, it has to be smarter. A lot of the people in this room or your companies are experts around the grid. All of the things I just talked about have to be done in the water industry as well. So there's going to be a time in the next decades where water is going to have the same importance from a technology standpoint that oil has today. But my point to you is that we're relatively early in the technology development of energy. Houston can be a leader in that. GE can be a leader in that. That's where I see the job growth in this town. And we are just beginning. Anybody that thinks that we are, you know, deeply penetrated into the innovation potential, we're just not. So it starts with technology. The second thing, and as I know my friend John was talking about it this morning, is you need really enlightened public policy. The free markets alone aren't going to solve the energy problems in the United States. Now, you know, I'm a Republican, right? And so when you talk about public policy, people think you're a socialist or a commie, you know, that there's something horribly wrong with you, that that if the free market can't do it, you know, you can't do it. And, you know, my suggestion is that this whole thing on clean energy, climate, this is not a Republican, Democrat, it's not environmentalist versus business. This country needs a clean energy policy. We just do. It's the way jobs will get created, and it's really important. I would ask just 3 questions for you to ponder. Why should Abu Dhabi build a nuclear power plant before the U.S. does, right? That's what happens when you don't have policy. Abu Dhabi, in the middle of unbelievable oil reserves, is going to have a nuclear power plant online before the U.S. builds a new nuclear power plant, number one. Number two, if you were a citizen of this country, a political or business person, you could wake up tomorrow morning and oil could be $120, $150 per barrel, and we could still be in a recession. Would you want that on your conscience? Would you want to live in a country where that could take place? Is that something that you want to be proud of? And do you want to wake up 5 years from now and find out that for all the conversation we've had in this country about electric batteries and electric vehicles, that 100% of those batteries are going to be made in China? Is that what you want? Would that make us proud to be an American? And somehow those three things could all take place. And some of them might take place. So my suggestion to you is there's nothing wimpish or socialistic or anything else about wanting to see some real leadership and energy in this country. And I'm not going to, I'm not going to pretend like it's okay to just do nothing. Now, the form is a debate, right? What happens? In other words, it's going to have some principles to it. It's going to, in the end, there's going to have to be some targets for greenhouse gas reduction. There's going to have to be some pricing mechanism for carbon. There's going to have to be some kind of standards for development. I would make them as broad as they could be. But if you could have a clean energy standard that would not be just about renewables, but would be about gas, would be about nuclear, would be about conservation, and if you could reward people to implement clean energy over the next 4 or 5 years, I think you'd lower cost. Ultimately, you'd create jobs. You're going to have mechanisms like that. Catalysts for new technology. There won't be a nuclear industry without government loan supports. There just won't be. So, pick your poison, but just realize that this is a sovereign business, and that's what you're going to have to do. You're going to have these big fights between states and the federal government. The fact that we have to regulate the grid in 50 different ways in 50 different states isn't the way any normal smart people would run this thing. So you're going to have some things that work in the national interest and national guidance over time. Work on conservation and things like that, but I would just advocate that don't let, I think after, when I was on vacation this summer, right, for a week, and I would play golf in the morning, then I would go home and I would turn on C-SPAN and watch these healthcare town halls, and say, oh man, there's some people out there that have bigger problems than I have. It made me feel quite good actually to see that. And I picture the same town hall around global warming, and man, but don't, particularly a town like Houston, and again, we're in the oil and gas business. We believe in all these technologies. Don't pray, nervous laughter is never good policy, right? Hoping that things never happen just isn't a good policy. We need good, bipartisan, productive public policy around energy, and we need it now. And so I think that's a point I'd make. Last three points I'd make on that is that most business people run their company as if there's going to be a price for carbon, that it's just a question of when and not if. And so I would actually say the business community has already made this determination. I work with John and others on a constructive way to think about it. The world is moving faster than we are. So in many ways, the leadership in Europe, the leadership in China is actually more sophisticated, moving faster than we are. And the last point I'd make is, nothing may happen in Copenhagen, but the fact that we're having this dialogue is quite constructive. So if I were talking to a Houstonian, I would say, own clean energy as a future. I know you're heavily weighted towards energy, but there's a lot of juice left to go. And don't shy away from a real public debate on energy policy. The last point I'd make is that if you do those two things well, there's really jobs out there that can be created that can help rejuvenate this country and help make us a real player. My sense is that there's about 1 million jobs, net new jobs, not cannibalization, but net new jobs that this country could have in the next 5 years just in the clean energy space. We lost 7.5 million jobs during the recession. And if you think about what can happen as we rejuvenate our technology, as we become an exporter, there really is some substantial job creation that can be out there. The problem is every city, every country, every state in the world thinks they're going to be a leader in green energy. So it's one of those things that you have to act now if you want to get ahead. I'll just give you two examples that I think people in this room will recognize. Europe just decides they're going to build 30 gigawatts of offshore wind power, 30 gigawatts. The North Shore is going to be powered by a wind. Germany, things like that. Now, the tariffs and stuff like that, they're ridiculously high priced in order to justify it. But there's 500,000 jobs. They're just going to do it. It's going to get out there. And the fact is that, Germany may have a higher cost of electricity, but they're 35% of their GDP is exports versus 7% in this country. So they learned how to compete with it, and they just move fast. The second one is Brazil. Brazil has a tremendous offshore oil finds, but they're going to use that as a way to create jobs. They're going to try to create 1 million jobs in Brazil based on the exploration of their oil finds. Now, think about natural gas. Think about if we had really an enlightened policy around the depths of natural gas that we have in this country, that we decided to use it to power transportation. We decided to build an infrastructure that would help get there. We would have less volatility over time. We would have lower cost over time. We would create jobs now. If we had the same kind of vision for our natural gas fields in the U.S. that we had for, that the Brazilians had or the people in Europe had, we could create jobs and the economy would grow, and I think we would be fine. So think about 1 million new jobs that are out there to be created, and the types of economics and techniques that can do it. In a space of maybe 5 or 10 million clean energy jobs are going to be created around the country. And again, it takes some business leadership, but it also takes political cooperation and leadership to get it done at the same time. I mean, everybody's worried about cost of electricity, and I get that. We're in a recession. People are hurting. People don't want to see their electricity bills go up, and I get that. But over time, if we don't move on some of these initiatives, they're going to go up anyhow, and we won't have any of the jobs to show for it. And so in some ways, we've got to go and we've got to create those jobs right now. One of the things that I've learned running GE, and that I compare notes with Lee Scott, both of us, Walmart and GE, decided in 2005 to run our companies as if the Kyoto Protocol, the standards for greenhouse gas emissions, were law. And we ran our companies accordingly. Walmart has saved $2 or $3 billion by doing it. I've saved $600 million by doing it. So sometimes driving conservation, sometimes driving these standards make our leaders better, make us smarter. And so I think that's the key. So I guess the messages I would give you is you're about as well positioned as anybody to be a leader in job creation around clean energy. I think there's about 1 million jobs out there to be had. There's no reason why a lot of those can't go in Houston. Unleash your universities, your R&D, your venture capitalists around technology. All of the skills it takes to be a good oil engineer, a good petrochemical engineer, those all can be applied to smart grid, wind energy. So you've got the technical and educational base here. Don't, Dan and I grew up in Cincinnati, which is a very conservative town. I realize Houston is a pretty conservative town. Green energy and energy policy isn't a Republican or Democrat debate. It really is a big picture American debate, and I think that's important, and focus on jobs. So, with that, maybe I thought I'd just, to close, just kind of elevate to say, solving things like clean energy and affordable health care, these are things Americans should be able to do. These are things that business should be able to do. When I travel the world, and again, I run a global company. 60% of GE is outside the United States. We are a big global company, but I'm an American. I don't make any, I run an American company that's winning around the world. I care about the country and where we are. But one of the things, I think we have to prove to ourselves that we can solve some of these problems, again, as a country, and that the people in this room and your colleagues around the United States have to be about those kind of solutions. And in some ways, energy is a microcosm of what I think has to go on in in the broad economy. You know, my own belief is that what happened in this financial crisis was a long way in coming. You know, we had for a generation, you know, probably the last 20 or 25 years, we had, as a country, stopped investing in technology and R&D. We had taken the financial service earnings as a percentage of the S&P 500, went from 10% in 1982 to 45% in 2007. You know, we had, I think, gotten, to a certain extent, some of our priorities and our long-term focus on competitiveness. We went from having massive trade surpluses to having massive trade deficits over that time period. And so a lot of this is the manifestation of what had happened over a relatively long period of time. And gee, he's not innocent in all this. You know, in other words, in some ways, we did a lot of great things over that time period. We earned a lot of money. We paid a lot of dividends. But we also, you know, we were part of the same process. So I'm not here to lecture you or things like that. I'm more here to say in closing, you know, I'm quite motivated by how we go forward. And I think there's some things we got to do. You know, the first thing is we have to convince our kids to go become engineers. We have to be more respectful of technology and R&D, and we have to be a country that is based on science again and innovation. Look, we got a $6 billion business in China. You know, when I go meet with the government there, they're not sitting there telling us how do we do good structured finance loans. They're saying, hey, how about that aircraft engine technology? How much can you do here? You know, this is a technology-based world, and we've got to find a way to rejuvenate technology. 4% of our American students going to colleges are studying engineering. We will graduate more sports therapists in the U.S. this year than engineers. So number one, technology. Number two, solutions. Number two, we've got to get about applying this technology towards clean energy, affordable healthcare, some of the things that the world needs, and make sure that that is a big part of what we do. Number three, I think just a repurposing. The basic arithmetic says that the job creation in construction and financial services, a lot of those jobs aren't going to come back. If we want to find 7.5 million jobs to fill the people that got laid off, we're going to have access to global markets. We're going to have to be an exporter again. 7% of our GDP is exports. It should be 15%. If we went from 7 to 15%, that would create a couple million jobs and reduce the trade deficit right away. In order to be an exporter, you got to make things. So we got to be focused on exports. We got to be focused on manufacturing. That's got to be a repurposing of the economy that happens right away. One of the things that helps exporters immensely and innovation immensely is a financial service industry that lends money. And you know, we can't do any of this without a vibrant financial service industry. We shouldn't be rooting against them. We should be rooting for them. And so I think, you know, any of this class warfare, we're just hurting ourselves. The banks and the banking industry is absolutely key to the future. And then the last thing, I just think business and government are going to have to work more constructively together to get all this stuff done. That we're at a point in time of a national introspection, a national crisis. We've got to work together to get that done. But if we invest in technology, if we invest in manufacturing and exports, if we solve big problems, if we work together, then I'm quite optimistic about where the future goes. And if you run a big company, or if you run any company in this room, I think the best part about this crisis is you can just leave it behind. You know, in other words, I've kind of used this as an opportunity to reset and renew GE. You know, you just can say, hey, look, I don't care what we did in the past. You basically have earned the right to stop doing anything you want to stop doing in this crisis. To say, hey, that was pre-crisis. We're not going to do it that way anymore. And if we don't take advantage of this great chance we've been given to reset our companies and reset our economy, you know, just we don't deserve to be leaders in this great country. And that's what we need right now. We use a phrase in our energy business. This is where I first learned it, and I'll share it with you today. You might want to jot it down. It's quite profound. And it's, it really, and the phrase goes something like this: to do something, you have to do something. Right? to do something, you have to do something. And I think we've all heard enough talk. We've all had enough discussion. I think we really know how to lead our companies. We know how to create the future. It's an investor's world, and it's one that needs our leadership as we go forward. So thanks for your attendance today. Thanks for your being such a good host to our GE team. We feel very welcome here. I just think it's a great place that respects, this is just a town that respects business people. It respects business. Our people feel like they're part of the community. They feel that they're wanted and respected and desired in Houston. And I want to say thanks for doing that and for your attendance, and wish everybody a happy holiday. Thank you.
First of all, Jeff, thank you so much for bringing your economic outlook. And on behalf of the board and on our Energy Collaborative chaired by John Hofmeister, we do accept your challenge on being the clean energy capital of the world. And we wanted to present to you a small token of our appreciation, a little reading material between now and the shareholders meeting in April.
Okay, great. Thanks. Thanks. We'll make some money together.
Yeah.
How's that? Okay, good.
A shareholder. He's going to be at the meeting in April, I think. Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks very much.